Marcus laughed coldly as he handed over his house keys. "Take care of my mother while I'm gone, and there's a bonus waiting." Carmen, the new housekeeper, took the keys with trembling hands and a sweet smile. What he witnessed through the security cameras 3 days later froze his blood forever. The black sedan pulled into the circular driveway of the sprawling estate just as the afternoon sun began its descent behind the manicured hedges. Marcus Whitfield stepped out of the vehicle, his expensive suit wrinkled from the long flight. Exhaustion etched across his weathered face. The 3-day business conference in Chicago had felt like an eternity. Each presentation and handshake a reminder of how empty success felt without Eleanor by his side. Her departure 2 years ago had left him adrift in a world of corporate achievements that suddenly seemed meaningless, their grand home echoing with memories of laughter that would never return. He had built an empire from nothing, transforming a small construction company into a multi-million-dollar real estate development firm, but every victory felt hollow now. The marble floors beneath his feet, the crystal chandeliers overhead, the priceless artwork adorning the walls, none of it mattered when he came home to silence. Only his mother, Margaret, remained as his anchor to something real, something that transcended the cold mathematics of profit and loss. At 78, she had been his rock through Eleanor's illness, sitting by hospital beds and holding hands when words failed, her own grief carefully hidden behind a facade of strength. The wheelchair had become part of their reality after Margaret's stroke 18 months ago, but her spirit remained unbroken. She navigated their home with the same determination that had carried her through decades of raising him as a single mother, working double shifts at the local diner to pay for his education. Now, the roles had reversed, and Marcus found purpose in caring for the woman who had sacrificed everything for his future. He had hired Carmen Rodriguez 3 weeks ago after the previous caretaker moved to Florida, impressed by her stellar references and gentle demeanor during the interview. Carmen had seemed perfect, soft-spoken, experienced, with tears in her eyes as she spoke about her own elderly grandmother back in El Salvador. She had worked for wealthy families before, understanding the delicate balance between professional distance and personal care that such positions required. Her background check had come back clean, her previous employers singing her praises for reliability and compassion. Marcus had felt relief washing over him as he shook her hand, believing he had found someone who would treat his mother with the respect and kindness she deserved. As he approached the front door, something felt different. The usual sounds of afternoon television drifting from the living room were absent, replaced by an unsettling quiet that made his steps slow. His key turned in the lock with a soft click, and he pushed the heavy oak door open, calling out his arrival. "Margaret, where are you?" The words echoed in the foyer, bouncing off the high ceilings and expensive artwork, but no response came. A chill ran down his spine as he noticed Margaret's favorite shawl crumpled on the floor near the staircase, as if it had been dropped in haste. The house felt wrong somehow, the familiar comfort of home replaced by an atmosphere of tension that made his skin crawl. He moved through the first floor methodically, checking the kitchen where Margaret usually spent her afternoons reading, the sunroom where she tended to her beloved orchids, the library where she lost herself in romance novels that reminded her of better times. Each empty room increased his anxiety, his businessman's instincts screaming that something was terribly amiss. The silence was not the peaceful quiet of an afternoon nap, but something heavier, more ominous. His feet carried him toward the back of the house, where the service entrance led to the utility rooms and Margaret's ground-floor bedroom. The hallway seemed longer than usual, shadows stretching across the hardwood floors like dark fingers reaching for him. As he rounded the corner near the laundry room, he heard it, a sound that made his blood freeze in his veins. It was his mother's voice, weak and trembling, pleading in a way he had never heard before, even during her darkest days in the hospital. "Please, Carmen, I promise I won't tell anyone. I just want to go back to my room. Please stop this." The words were barely audible, spoken with the desperate tone of someone who had been broken down over time, each syllable heavy with fear and resignation. Marcus pressed himself against the wall, his heart hammering against his ribs as he tried to process what he was hearing. This couldn't be real. Carmen was supposed to be taking care of his mother, not reducing her to this state of terror. He crept closer to the partially open door of the utility room, every muscle in his body coiled with tension. Through the crack, he could see his mother's wheelchair positioned near the industrial sink, her usually pristine appearance disheveled, and her silver hair matted with what looked like dirt. Carmen stood over her, holding a metal bucket with both hands, her face twisted into an expression of cruel satisfaction that bore no resemblance to the gentle woman he had hired. The sweet demeanor she had displayed during their interview had vanished completely, replaced by something cold and calculating that made Marcus's stomach turn. "You think you're so special, don't you? Living in this palace while people like me scrub your floors." Carmen's voice was low and venomous, each word dripping with years of accumulated resentment. "Your precious son thinks he can just throw money around and everything will be perfect. Well, let me show you what the real world feels like." She tilted the bucket, and Marcus watched in horror as dirty water mixed with sand began to pour over his mother's head, soaking her clothes and running down her face in muddy streams. Margaret's shoulders shook as she tried to shield herself with trembling hands, her voice barely a whisper as she continued to plead. "I never did anything to hurt you, Carmen. Please, I can't take much more of this." The words cut through Marcus like shards of glass, each syllable a testament to suffering he had never imagined possible in his own home. His mother, who had faced down landlords and bill collectors with fierce determination, who had worked her fingers to the bone to give him opportunities she never had, was being systematically destroyed by someone he had trusted. The scene before him triggered memories of his childhood, watching his mother come home exhausted from thankless jobs where she was treated as invisible, her dignity intact despite the condescension of employers who saw her as nothing more than a tool. Now, in what should have been her sanctuary, she was experiencing the same cruelty from someone Marcus had believed would protect her. The irony was devastating. His success, built on his mother's sacrifices, had inadvertently provided the stage for her humiliation. Carmen continued her torment with practiced efficiency, as if this was a routine she had perfected over weeks. She retrieved a dirty rag from the bucket and began roughly wiping Margaret's face, her movements deliberately harsh and degrading. "This is what you deserve for looking down on me, for acting like you're better than the help. Your son may pay my salary, but when he's gone, you belong to me." The words were spoken with such casual cruelty that Marcus realized this was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of abuse that had been escalating in his absence. Every business trip, every late night at the office, every moment he had spent building his empire while trusting someone else to care for his mother, now felt like a betrayal. The guilt hit him like a physical blow, doubling him over as he struggled to breathe. How long had this been happening? How many times had Margaret endured this treatment while he was signing contracts and attending meetings, oblivious to her suffering? The questions tormented him as he watched Carmen deliberately splash more dirty water across his mother's wheelchair, soaking the cushions that would leave her sitting in discomfort for hours. Marcus's hands clenched into fists as rage built in his chest, a fury unlike anything he had ever experienced in boardrooms or business negotiations. This was personal, visceral, an attack on the person he loved most in the world. His mother had given him everything, working multiple jobs to pay for his education, sacrificing her own dreams so he could chase his. She had celebrated every promotion, every business success, never asking for anything in return except his happiness. Now she was paying the price for his achievements, suffering because he had been too busy, too trusting, too naive to see the monster he had invited into their home. Carmen seemed to be enjoying herself now, her movements becoming more theatrical as she continued the abuse. She began narrating her actions like a twisted performance, describing how pathetic Margaret looked, how helpless she was without her precious son to protect her. The psychological torture was almost worse than the physical abuse, designed to strip away every ounce of dignity his mother had left. This was not the work of someone who had snapped under pressure, but the calculated cruelty of a predator who had found the perfect victim. The woman he had hired based on glowing recommendations was revealing her true nature, and Marcus began to wonder how she had managed to hide this darkness from previous employers. Had there been other victims, other families who had trusted her with their most vulnerable members? The thought made him sick, realizing that his mother might be just one in a series of people Carmen had targeted and tormented. The references that had seemed so impressive now felt like elaborate fiction, carefully constructed to gain access to households where she could exercise power over those unable to defend themselves. As he watched Carmen prepare another bucket of dirty water, Marcus knew he had seen enough. Every second he delayed meant more suffering for his mother, more damage to the woman who had shaped him into the man he had become. His business instincts, honed through years of negotiations and corporate warfare, kicked into overdrive as he began planning his next moves. This would not end with simply firing Carmen and finding a new caretaker. This level of cruelty demanded consequences, accountability, and most importantly, justice for his mother's suffering. He backed away from the door silently, his mind racing through options and strategies. His first priority was documenting what he had witnessed, creating evidence that would ensure Carmen faced real consequences for her actions. His phone was already in his hand, the camera function activated as he prepared to gather proof of the abuse. But beyond the immediate need for evidence, Marcus felt something deeper stirring within him, a protective instinct that transcended legal proceedings and entered the realm of absolute moral certainty. The successful businessman, who had built an empire through careful planning and strategic thinking, was giving way to something more primal, more fundamental. He was a son witnessing his mother's torment, and every fiber of his being screamed for retribution. The woman who had given him life, who had sacrificed her youth and dreams for his future, was being degraded by someone who saw her as nothing more than an opportunity for sadistic pleasure. This could not stand. This would not be tolerated. And Carmen Rodriguez was about to discover that some lines, once crossed, led to consequences beyond her worst nightmares. The sound of more water splashing reached his ears, followed by his mother's quiet sobbing, and Marcus felt something cold and implacable settle in his chest. Carmen had chosen the wrong family to target, the wrong son to deceive, and most importantly, the wrong mother to abuse. The reckoning that was coming would be swift, thorough, and absolutely merciless. Justice was about to arrive at 1247 Elm Street, and it was wearing a $1,000 suit and carrying the full weight of a son's love for his mother. Marcus moved through his house like a predator now, every step calculated and purposeful. He activated the security camera system from his phone, ensuring that every moment of what was about to unfold would be recorded in high definition. The evidence he was about to capture would not only protect his mother, but potentially save other vulnerable people from falling victim to Carmen's cruelty. This was bigger than personal revenge. This was about stopping a predator who had been masquerading as a caregiver. The irony was not lost on him that his business success, the very thing that had made him a target for Carmen's resentment, would now provide the resources necessary to ensure she faced appropriate consequences. His legal team, his private investigator contacts, his ability to hire the best security experts, all of it would be brought to bear in service of protecting his mother and exposing the truth about Carmen Rodriguez. She had underestimated not just his love for his mother, but his capacity for methodical, devastating retaliation when that love was threatened. As he prepared to confront the woman who had been systematically destroying his mother's spirit, Marcus felt a strange calm descending over him. This was familiar territory in a way, identifying a threat, gathering intelligence, and planning a response that would neutralize the danger completely. The skills that had made him successful in business would now serve a far more important purpose, ensuring that his mother never again had to fear the person entrusted with her care. The sound of Carmen's laughter drifted down the hallway, cold and mocking, as she continued her abuse of the woman who had once worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. That laughter would be the last moment of joy Carmen Rodriguez would experience for a very long time. Marcus Whitfield was about to remind her that some people's mothers were protected by sons with the resources and determination to make bad people disappear from their lives permanently. He checked his phone one more time, ensuring the cameras were recording, and began walking toward the utility room with purpose. The confrontation that was about to unfold would be swift, decisive, and absolutely devastating for Carmen. She had awakened something in him that went beyond business acumen or legal strategy. She had triggered the protective instincts of a son who would move heaven and earth to shield his mother from harm. The door was still partially open when Marcus reached it, and he could see Carmen raising another bucket above his mother's head, preparing to dump more dirty water on the woman who had already endured far too much. The time for observation was over. The time for planning had passed. Now was the moment for action, for justice, and for ensuring that Margaret Whitfield would never again have to suffer at the hands of someone trusted with her care. Marcus pushed the door open with enough force to slam it against the wall, the sudden noise causing Carmen to freeze mid-motion, the bucket still raised above his mother's head. The look of shock on her face was immediately replaced by fear as she realized her carefully hidden cruelty had been discovered by the one person who could end her comfortable employment and comfortable lie. "What exactly do you think you're doing to my mother?" His voice was quiet, deadly calm, each word carrying the weight of absolute authority and barely contained rage. Carmen's face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, fear, and then a desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. She lowered the bucket slowly, her mind clearly racing to construct some explanation that might save her position. "Mr. Whitfield, you're back early. Your mother had an accident, and I was cleaning her up." The lies came smoothly, practiced, as if she had prepared for this possibility. But the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear, and the cruel expression that had been on her face moments before was impossible to completely mask. Marcus stepped into the room, his presence filling the space with an energy that made Carmen take an involuntary step backward. He moved to his mother's wheelchair, his eyes never leaving Carmen's face as he gently placed his hands on Margaret's shoulders. His mother looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, relief flooding her features as she realized her ordeal was finally over. The mixture of gratitude and shame in her eyes nearly broke his heart, but he kept his voice steady and calm as he spoke to her. "Are you hurt, Mom? Do you need medical attention?" His hands were gentle as he examined her for injuries, noting the way she flinched when he touched certain areas, evidence of abuse that had been ongoing for weeks. Margaret shook her head, unable to speak through her tears, but her grip on his hand was desperate, as if she was afraid he might disappear and leave her alone with Carmen again. The trust in her eyes, despite everything she had endured, reminded him of why he was fighting, not just for justice, but for the woman who had given him everything. Carmen seemed to realize that her initial explanation was not working, and Marcus could see her mind working to construct a new narrative. She began speaking more rapidly, her voice taking on a tone of injured innocence that might have been convincing to someone who hadn't witnessed her cruelty firsthand. "Your mother has been very difficult lately, Mr. Whitfield. She's been throwing things, making messes, and I've been trying to maintain some discipline. Sometimes elderly people need firm handling to maintain proper behavior. The words were carefully chosen, designed to shift blame onto Margaret and position Carmen as the long-suffering caregiver dealing with a challenging patient. The audacity of the lie, delivered while his mother sat soaking wet and traumatized in her wheelchair, pushed Marcus beyond anger into a realm of cold, calculating fury. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, tapping the screen to stop the recording that had captured everything. The security cameras in this room have been recording everything for the past 15 minutes, Carmen. Would you like to revise your story? Or should we let the police review the footage and decide what really happened here? His voice was conversational, almost friendly, but the threat underneath was unmistakable. The color drained from Carmen's face as she realized the implications of what he had said. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for the cameras she had somehow missed during her weeks of abuse. The confident demeanor she had maintained while tormenting his mother crumbled completely, replaced by the desperate panic of someone who knew their carefully constructed lies were about to be exposed. The security system, she had been told, was for protection against break-ins, had been recording her crimes in high-definition detail, creating evidence that would be impossible to deny or explain away. Marcus continued speaking, his tone never changing from that deadly calm that was more terrifying than any shouting could have been. I've been watching you for 10 minutes, Carmen. I saw you pour dirty water over my mother's head. I heard you tell her she deserved this treatment. I recorded you deliberately degrading a 78-year-old woman who never did anything to hurt you. So please, tell me again about how you were just cleaning up after an accident. The words hung in the air like a challenge, daring her to continue lying in the face of undeniable evidence. Carmen's mouth opened and closed several times as she struggled to find words that might salvage the situation. The woman who had been so articulate in her cruelty, so confident in her power over Margaret, was now stammering and backing toward the door like a cornered animal. I can explain. She needs structure. You don't understand how difficult. The fragmented sentences revealed the collapse of her mental defenses as she realized there was no explanation that could justify what she had done. Marcus moved closer to Carmen, his presence intimidating despite his outward calm. His mother's safety was no longer in immediate danger, which allowed him to focus on ensuring that Carmen understood the full scope of the consequences she was about to face. You're going to leave this house right now, Carmen. You're going to collect your things and walk out that front door. And you're never going to contact anyone in this family again. But that's just the beginning. His words were measured, each one delivered with the precision of a man who had spent years in boardrooms where every syllable carried financial implications. The police will receive copies of the security footage within the hour, along with a formal complaint detailing the systematic abuse of an elderly, disabled woman. I'll be hiring a private investigator to examine your employment history, because I suspect my mother wasn't your first victim. And I'll be contacting every family you've worked for to ensure they know exactly what kind of person they've trusted with their loved ones. His methodical description of her future was delivered without emotion, like a business plan being presented to shareholders, which somehow made it more terrifying than any angry threats could have been. Carmen's composure finally shattered completely. She began crying, not the manipulative tears she might have used to garner sympathy, but the genuine panic of someone who realized their life was about to be destroyed by their own actions. Please, Mr. Whitfield, I need this job. I have bills to pay, family depending on me. Your mother is fine. She's not really hurt. We can work this out between us, can't we? The desperation in her voice was pathetic, a stark contrast to the cruel confidence she had displayed while abusing Margaret. Marcus felt no sympathy for her plight. The woman who had shown no mercy to his vulnerable mother would receive none in return. The problems you're about to face are entirely of your own making, Carmen. Every consequence you experience will be the direct result of choices you made when you decided to abuse someone who couldn't defend herself. My mother's suffering has been your entertainment, and now your cruelty will be your downfall. His words were final, carrying the weight of absolute judgment from someone who held all the power in the situation. He moved to help his mother out of her wheelchair, supporting her weight as she struggled to stand on shaking legs. The physical effects of her ordeal were obvious: exhaustion, pain, and the lingering fear that comes from prolonged abuse. But Marcus could see something else in her eyes now, a spark of the strength that had carried her through decades of hardship. Witnessing her son's protection, seeing Carmen reduced to a cowering, desperate figure, was beginning to restore some of the dignity that had been systematically stripped away. Carmen made one last desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. "You can't prove I intended to hurt her. It will be my word against yours about what you think you saw. The legal system doesn't always side with rich people, you know. There are labor laws, wrongful termination protections. I have rights, too." Her voice carried a trace of the venom she had displayed earlier, revealing that her remorse was purely selfish, focused on avoiding consequences rather than genuine regret for her actions. Marcus almost smiled at her naivety. Carmen clearly didn't understand the resources he could bring to bear, or the thoroughness with which he approached problems that threatened his family. "I have high-definition video evidence of you abusing my mother, along with audio recordings of your threats and degrading comments. I have medical documentation of her decline since you started working here, and I suspect that when investigators examine your background more closely, they'll find a pattern of behavior that will make your current situation much worse." Her attempt to threaten him legally was like bringing a toy knife to a gunfight, pathetically inadequate, and revealing of her complete misunderstanding of the situation. The sound of sirens in the distance indicated that his call to the police had been answered with appropriate urgency. Marcus had contacted them immediately after starting his recording, knowing that Carmen's removal from the house would need to be official and documented to prevent any future attempts at retaliation or contact. The law enforcement response would add another layer of legitimacy to the charges that would soon be filed, ensuring that Carmen's crimes were treated with the seriousness they deserved. Carmen heard the sirens too, and the last vestiges of her defiance crumbled into pure terror. She began backing toward the door more rapidly, her movements frantic as she realized escape was no longer possible. "Please, I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. Just don't let them arrest me. I'll give you back the money I took from the house fund. I'll tell other families I'm not available. We can pretend this never happened." Her confession to theft, delivered in panic, provided additional evidence of her criminal behavior and confirmed Marcus's suspicions that financial exploitation had accompanied the physical abuse. Marcus kept his arm around his mother's shoulders as they watched Carmen's desperate pleading. There was something deeply satisfying about seeing the woman who had tormented Margaret reduced to begging for mercy she had never shown. The balance of power had shifted completely, and Carmen was experiencing the helplessness and fear she had deliberately inflicted on someone who had been unable to fight back. The sirens were getting closer, and Marcus knew that justice was only minutes away. "You should have thought about consequences before you decided to abuse my mother, Carmen. Every choice has a price, and you're about to pay for weeks of cruelty with years of legal problems. The officers who are about to walk through that door will hear your confession to theft, see the evidence of abuse, and escort you to a place where you can think about whether tormenting elderly people was worth destroying your own life." His words carried the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence, because in many ways, that's exactly what was happening. The front door opened with the sound of heavy footsteps and authoritative voices as police officers entered the house. Marcus called out to direct them to the utility room, his voice carrying the calm confidence of someone who had nothing to hide and everything to prove. The cavalry had arrived, and Carmen Rodriguez's reign of terror over Margaret Whitfield was about to end in handcuffs and criminal charges that would follow her for the rest of her life. As the officers entered the room, Marcus began providing a clear, concise summary of what they would find on the security footage. His years of business presentations served him well as he laid out the evidence methodically, ensuring that nothing would be missed or misunderstood. Carmen stood frozen in the corner, no longer bothering to deny her crimes, as the weight of legal consequences settled over her like a suffocating blanket. The woman who had wielded power over his mother so cruelly was about to discover what real power looked like when it was used to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. The investigation that followed was thorough and damning. Security footage revealed weeks of escalating abuse. Financial records showed systematic theft from household accounts, and interviews with previous employers uncovered a pattern of manipulation and cruelty that had been carefully hidden behind fake references and stolen identities. Carmen Rodriguez, it turned out, was not even her real name, and the woman Marcus had trusted with his mother's care was a career predator who had targeted vulnerable families across 3 states. 6 months later, Marcus sat in his mother's sunroom, watching her tend to her orchids with hands that no longer trembled. The trial had been swift and decisive, with Carmen receiving a sentence that reflected both the severity of her crimes and the judge's disgust at her targeting of elderly victims. Margaret had testified via video link, her quiet dignity and obvious trauma creating a powerful impact on the jury that no defense attorney could overcome. The experience had changed both of them in profound ways. Marcus had restructured his business to allow more time at home, hiring managers to handle travel and remote operations so he could be present for his mother's recovery. The guilt he felt over his absence during Carmen's abuse had motivated him to become not just a provider, but a protector, someone who would never again trust his mother's safety to strangers without comprehensive verification. Margaret, despite everything she had endured, had shown remarkable resilience in rebuilding her sense of security and self-worth. The therapy sessions Marcus had arranged helped her process the trauma, but her own inner strength proved to be the most powerful factor in her recovery. She had survived poverty, single motherhood, and her husband's early passing, and she would survive Carmen Rodriguez's cruelty too, emerging stronger and more determined to enjoy the years she had left. The new caregiver, Mrs. Patricia Chen, was a licensed nurse with impeccable credentials and a background check so thorough it included interviews with former patients and their families. More importantly, she treated Margaret with the respect and kindness that should have been standard from the beginning, seeing her not as a burden to be managed, but as a person deserving of dignity and care. The contrast with Carmen's treatment was so stark that it made Marcus wonder how he had ever been fooled by the previous woman's act. 2 years after that terrible afternoon in the utility room, Marcus found himself reflecting on how crisis had ultimately strengthened their family bonds. He and Margaret spent their evenings talking about everything from business decisions to family memories, conversations that had been rare during his previous focus on career advancement. The almost loss of his mother had reminded him that success without family was ultimately meaningless, and that protecting the people you love required more than just financial resources. It demanded presence, attention, and the willingness to fight when they were threatened. The legal victory over Carmen had been satisfying, but the real triumph was watching his mother rediscover her joy in simple pleasures. She had returned to her romance novels, her flower gardening, and her weekly video calls with old friends who had been concerned about her withdrawal during the months of abuse. Her laughter, which had been absent for so long, once again filled the rooms of their home, proof that healing was possible even after the worst kinds of betrayal. Marcus had also used his experience to advocate for stronger protections for elderly Americans, funding background check services for families hiring caregivers and supporting legislation that would close loopholes in the system that predators like Carmen exploited. His mother's suffering had been transformed into a force for positive change that would protect other vulnerable people from similar experiences. The security camera system that had captured Carmen's crimes now served a different purpose, providing peace of mind rather than evidence collection. Margaret could move through her home knowing that her safety was being monitored and that help would arrive immediately if needed. The technology that had exposed one person's cruelty now served as a guardian angel, a silent protector that ensured her golden years would be filled with security rather than fear. As Marcus watched his mother carefully watering her prize orchid, her face peaceful and content in the afternoon sunlight, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction that went beyond any business achievement. They had faced the worst that human nature could offer and emerged victorious, their bond stronger than ever, and their commitment to protecting each other absolute. The wealth he had accumulated meant nothing compared to the smile on his mother's face and the knowledge that she felt safe in her own home. The story of Carmen Rodriguez had become a cautionary tale within their community, a reminder that evil often wears a mask of respectability, and that protecting our loved ones requires constant vigilance. But it was also a story of justice prevailing, of love conquering cruelty, and of the unbreakable bond between a mother and son who refused to let darkness triumph over light. What would you do to protect the people you love most? How far would you go to ensure that those who have sacrificed for you never have to suffer at the hands of those who see kindness as weakness? In a world where predators target the vulnerable and trust can be weaponized against the innocent, the greatest act of love is the willingness to stand guard against those who would do harm. Margaret and Marcus Whitfield learned that sometimes the most important battles are fought not in boardrooms or courthouses, but in the quiet corners of our homes where the most precious people in our lives deserve to feel safe, respected, and loved. Their story reminds us that justice delayed is not justice denied, and that the bonds of family, tested by fire, can emerge stronger than ever before.